A substitute teacher vanished from elite school in 1994. 6 years later, students' hidden camera reveals what really happened in room 237. Jennifer Walsh was 26 years old when she disappeared from Whitmore Academy on the evening of October 14, 1994. She had been hired as a temporary substitute for the school's advanced English program, covering classes while the regular teacher recovered from surgery. Her car was found in the faculty parking lot the next morning, keys in the ignition, lesson plans still spread across her desk in room 237. The local police investigation lasted 6 months before the case went cold. No witnesses, no ransom demands, no trace of where she had gone or why. Jennifer's family hired private investigators who found nothing. The school continued operating normally, eventually hiring a permanent replacement teacher. But in the spring of 2000, a former student named Marcus Rodriguez discovered something while cleaning out his childhood bedroom. Hidden inside an old textbook was a micro-cassette recorder he had forgotten about, one he had used to secretly record what he thought would be evidence of grade inflation at the prestigious academy. What the tape revealed instead was the last conversation Jennifer Walsh ever had, and the shocking truth about what really happened in room 237 on that October night 6 years earlier. The coffee was still warm. Detective Ray Morrison stood in the doorway of room 237 at Whitmore Academy, watching steam rise from a half-filled mug on the teacher's desk. October 15th, 1994, 7:42 a.m. The custodian had found the classroom exactly like this 20 minutes earlier. Desk lamp burning bright, lesson plans spread across the wooden surface, red pen abandoned mid-correction. The overhead projector hummed quietly in the corner, casting the ghostly outline of a transparency onto the whiteboard. Jennifer Walsh's purse sat open beside the coffee mug, wallet and keys visible inside. Morrison walked slowly around the desk, his footsteps echoing in the empty room. The security logs showed her badge being used to enter the building at 5:47 p.m. the previous evening. There was no record of her leaving. Her car remained in the faculty parking lot, doors unlocked, engine cold. The night security guard swore he had seen lights in the upper classrooms during his 11 p.m. rounds, but assumed a teacher was working late. Everything suggested she had stepped out for just a moment. But Jennifer Walsh was nowhere to be found. Morrison picked up the red pen, still uncapped. A student's essay lay beneath it, half corrected with Jennifer's neat handwriting filling the margins. Her coffee mug bore fresh lipstick marks on the rim. The academy's headmaster, Richard Pemberton, stood in the hallway wringing his hands. His starched shirt showed sweat stains despite the October chill. He had called the police the moment the custodian reported the abandoned classroom, he claimed. Morrison studied the man's nervous fidgeting. In his 20 years of police work, he had learned to read the difference between concern and guilt. What had happened in room 237 between sunset and dawn? The photographs told a story of interruption. Morrison's camera clicked steadily as he documented every detail of the abandoned classroom. October 15th, 1994, 9:15 a.m. Each image captured the eerie stillness of a moment frozen in time. Jennifer's lesson plan for the day remained spread across her desk, written in careful cursive. Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scene 2. Discussion questions. How does Juliet's reaction to Tybalt's death reveal her character development? The margins contained her personal notes about engaging reluctant readers. Her gradebook lay open to a page marked Period 6, Advanced English. Red ink corrections stopped abruptly in the middle of an essay about teenage rebellion. Officer Sarah Kim examined the student desks arranged in neat rows. No signs of struggle, no overturned chairs, no scattered papers. The blackboard still displayed yesterday's vocabulary words in Jennifer's precise handwriting. The academy's vice principal, Margaret Torres, hovered near the doorway. She had worked with Jennifer for 3 weeks, she explained. The young substitute had been professional, punctual, and well-liked by both students and faculty. But something in Torres's voice made Morrison look up from his notes. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she straightened already perfect papers on a nearby desk. Her eyes darted repeatedly to the classroom door, as if expecting someone to appear. When Morrison asked about Jennifer's last day at work, Torres claimed everything had been perfectly normal. Everyone at Whitmore Academy seemed nervous this morning. The question was whether they were worried about Jennifer Walsh or worried about what her disappearance might reveal. Morrison noticed how the staff avoided making eye contact with him, how conversations stopped when he approached. What secrets were hiding behind the ivy-covered walls of this elite institution? Jennifer Walsh had wanted to teach since she was 7 years old. Detective Morrison sat across from her parents in their modest Cleveland living room, October 16, 1994. Family photographs covered every surface, telling the story of a girl who had never wavered from her calling. Her childhood bedroom had been arranged like a classroom, complete with a chalkboard where she conducted lessons for her stuffed animals. Robert and Linda Walsh clutched each other's hands as they described their daughter's passion for education. She had graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State with degrees in English literature and secondary education. Her student teaching evaluations praised her innovative lesson plans and natural rapport with teenagers. Professor Catherine Mills had written that Jennifer possessed an intuitive understanding of how young minds process complex literature. But steady teaching positions were scarce in 1994. Budget cuts had eliminated hundreds of openings across Ohio. Jennifer had been substitute teaching for 2 years, moving between districts, taking any assignment offered. She lived in a cramped studio apartment, surviving on sporadic paychecks and hope. The Whitmore Academy job was supposed to be different. A prestigious private school, excellent references, the possibility of a permanent position when Mrs. Henderson returned from medical leave. Jennifer had called home 3 times during her first week, bubbling with excitement about her students' enthusiasm and the school's resources. Linda Walsh's voice broke as she handed Morrison a letter Jennifer had written the night before she disappeared. "I think this might finally be my chance, Mom. The students here actually want to learn. They ask questions that make me think harder about the books I thought I knew by heart. Even the struggling readers are engaged when I give them different approaches to the material." The letter continued with details about her lesson plans, her hopes for implementing new teaching methods, her dreams of finally having her own classroom. Jennifer had felt valued at Whitmore in ways she never had as a temporary substitute. She had believed her career was finally beginning. Why would someone so close to achieving her dreams simply vanish without a trace? The Whitmore Academy faculty painted a picture of perfection. Morrison spent the afternoon interviewing Jennifer's colleagues, October 16, 1994. Each conversation felt rehearsed, as if everyone had agreed on the same script. Jennifer was professional, punctual, well prepared. She had impressed the department head with her creative lesson plans. The students respected her, despite her temporary status. English Department Chair Patricia Williams insisted that Jennifer had shown no signs of distress or conflict. Her classroom management was excellent, her grading fair and thorough. She had even volunteered to stay late for extra tutoring sessions with struggling students. Williams spoke in clipped, measured sentences, her fingers drumming against her desk in a nervous rhythm. But when Morrison pressed for specifics, the answers became vague. Williams couldn't remember which students had requested tutoring. She wasn't sure about Jennifer's exact schedule that final week. Her usually perfect memory seemed to have selective gaps whenever Morrison asked about concrete details. The other faculty members displayed similar amnesia. History teacher David Park praised Jennifer's dedication, but couldn't recall any meaningful conversations with her. Science department head Robert Martinez described her as friendly, but maintained she kept to herself. Math teacher Lisa Thompson nodded along to everything her colleagues said, without adding any personal observations. Every description felt hollow, lacking the personal details that make someone real. No one mentioned Jennifer's habit of arriving early to prepare elaborate visual aids. No one recalled her enthusiasm for discussing literature during lunch breaks. No one acknowledged the way she had brightened when talking about her students' progress. Morrison noticed how they avoided eye contact when discussing Jennifer's last day. Their hands fidgeted with papers, pens, coffee cups. Williams straightened already perfect stacks of documents. Park checked his watch repeatedly during their brief conversation. Thompson excused herself twice to use the restroom. The nervous energy that had filled room 237 seemed to infect the entire school. These educators, trained to observe and analyze student behavior, suddenly displayed all the classic signs of deception when discussing their missing colleague. What were they all so afraid to remember? The students told a different story entirely. Morrison gathered a group of Jennifer's advanced English students in the library, October 17, 1994. Away from faculty supervision, their carefully constructed politeness began to crack. The teenagers sat in a loose circle, glancing nervously at each other before speaking. 16-year-old Amanda Foster was the first to speak honestly about their substitute teacher. Jennifer had been different from the other faculty, Amanda explained. She actually listened when students talked about the books they were reading. She encouraged them to disagree with traditional interpretations, to find their own meaning in the texts. Some of the older teachers disapproved of her methods, whispering complaints about undermining established curriculum. Marcus Rodriguez, a quiet junior with thick glasses, revealed that Jennifer had stayed after class several times to help him with his college application essays. She had believed in his writing ability when his regular teachers dismissed him as average. Her encouragement had given him confidence he had never felt before. She had even suggested books that might help him develop his voice as a writer. Sarah Phillips, usually the most reserved student in class, spoke up about Jennifer's unusual grading methods. Instead of simply marking errors, Jennifer wrote detailed comments, explaining why certain approaches worked better than others. She helped students understand the reasoning behind grammar rules, rather than just memorizing them. Her feedback made them want to improve, rather than simply accept their limitations. But the most revealing detail came from Stephanie Kim, the class president. Jennifer had discovered something troubling in recent weeks, Stephanie whispered. She had asked strange questions about grade reports and college recommendation letters. She seemed confused about discrepancies she had noticed in student records. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances as they described Jennifer's growing concern about administrative policies she didn't understand. She had mentioned wanting to discuss these issues with the principal, but had seemed worried about overstepping her boundaries as a substitute. Jennifer had asked if any of them had noticed unusual patterns in how grades were recorded or reported to their parents. Amanda revealed that Jennifer had been particularly interested in the advanced placement testing procedures. She had asked detailed questions about how scores were submitted to colleges, who had access to the records, and whether students ever received different grades than they expected. Her curiosity had seemed innocent at first, but her questions became more pointed as the weeks passed. Had Jennifer Walsh stumbled onto something that made her dangerous to the people who ran Whitmore Academy? The bloodhounds found nothing but dead ends. State Police K-9 units arrived at Whitmore Academy on October 18, 1994, their German shepherds straining against leather leashes. The dogs followed Jennifer's scent from room 237 down the main hallway, through the administrative offices, and out the rear exit that led to the faculty parking lot. Detective Morrison watched as the trail went cold at the edge of the asphalt. The dogs circled in confusion, whining as they lost the scent completely. Their handler, Sergeant Mike Torres, shook his head grimly. Either Jennifer had gotten into a vehicle at that exact spot, or someone had deliberately obscured her trail using chemical masking agents. Professional criminals might know about scent masking, but this felt different. The search expanded to include the surrounding woods and nearby residential areas. Volunteers from Jennifer's church joined police officers in combing through dense underbrush and abandoned buildings. They found nothing except an old hiking boot that belonged to a maintenance worker and a rusted bicycle frame that had been there for years. Morrison studied the aerial photographs taken by the police helicopter. Whitmore Academy sat on 47 acres of pristine landscape with multiple buildings connected by stone pathways. Dense forests bordered the property on 3 sides. The detective organized search teams into grid patterns, methodically examining every square foot of accessible terrain. Volunteer firefighters used thermal imaging equipment to scan the wooded areas for any signs of recent disturbance. Local diving teams checked the ornamental pond near the academy's entrance, dragging the murky bottom with specialized hooks and nets. Each search effort yielded the same frustrating result. No physical evidence, no disturbed earth, no clothing fragments caught on branches. It was as if Jennifer Walsh had simply evaporated into thin air somewhere between room 237 and the faculty parking lot. But something bothered Morrison about the scent trail ending so abruptly. This felt like someone with access to the school's resources and knowledge of police procedures. The precision of the disappearance suggested careful planning rather than spontaneous violence. Who at Whitmore Academy had the expertise to make a person disappear without a trace? Richard Pemberton's story changed each time he told it. Morrison sat across from the headmaster in his wood-paneled office, October 19, 1994. Diplomas and awards covered the walls, testimony to Pemberton's 23 years in education. His hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee from an expensive silver service. During their first interview, Pemberton had claimed he barely knew Jennifer Walsh. She was just a temporary substitute, barely on his radar. But now he admitted to having several conversations with her about classroom management and curriculum standards. Morrison pressed harder about Jennifer's final day at work. Pemberton insisted that everything had been perfectly normal. Jennifer had taught her regular schedule, attended the mandatory faculty meeting, and left the building at her usual time. But when Morrison mentioned the security logs showing her badge access at 5:47 p.m., Pemberton's composure cracked. The headmaster fumbled through papers on his desk, searching for documentation that didn't seem to exist. He couldn't explain why Jennifer would have returned to the building after leaving. Morrison noticed subtle signs of deception in Pemberton's body language. The man's eyes darted toward his filing cabinet whenever difficult questions arose. His fingers drummed against his mahogany desk in irregular patterns. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the office's comfortable temperature. The detective examined the degrees and certificates displayed throughout the room. Pemberton had graduated from exclusive institutions, earned advanced degrees in educational administration, served on numerous professional committees. This was not a man who forgot important details or misplaced crucial documents. Morrison noticed a photograph on Pemberton's bookshelf showing the headmaster with several well-dressed adults at what appeared to be a formal dinner. The men wore expensive suits and confident smiles. A small placard identified them as members of the Board of Trustees. These were the people who really controlled Whitmore Academy. Private schools like Whitmore survived on wealthy donors and influential connections. If Jennifer had discovered something that threatened those relationships, her disappearance might have been orchestrated by people with significant resources and motivation. What secrets were worth destroying an innocent teacher's life to protect? The investigation hit brick walls at every turn. Morrison's partner, Detective Lisa Park, returned from interviewing Jennifer's neighbors with frustrating news. October 20th, 1994. No one had seen anything unusual at Jennifer's apartment building. Her mail was piling up, her plants were dying from lack of water, and her cat was being fed by a concerned neighbor. The apartment itself told the story of someone planning to return. Jennifer's bed was neatly made, her lesson plans for the following week spread across her kitchen table. Park had spent hours examining Jennifer's personal belongings for any clue about her state of mind. The refrigerator contained fresh groceries purchased on October 13th. Jennifer's calendar showed appointments scheduled through the end of November, including a dentist visit and dinner plans with college friends. Her answering machine held messages from her parents, a former roommate, and the public library, confirming her request for research materials. Bank records showed no unusual financial activity. Jennifer's modest checking account had not been accessed since October 13th, when she had withdrawn $40 from an ATM near the school. Morrison expanded the investigation to include Jennifer's college friends and former colleagues. Each interview painted the same picture of a dedicated teacher who would never abandon her responsibilities without explanation. Professor Mills from Ohio State insisted that Jennifer had been excited about her potential future at Whitmore Academy. She had called just days before her disappearance to discuss her ideas for implementing new teaching methods. The detective contacted substitute teaching agencies throughout Ohio and neighboring states. Jennifer's reputation was spotless across every district where she had worked. But the investigation kept running into institutional resistance. Whitmore Academy's lawyers blocked access to personnel files and student records. The school board cited privacy concerns and threatened legal action if police overstepped their authority. Even basic information about Jennifer's employment contract required a court order to obtain. The FBI offered assistance with the case, but their involvement brought new complications. Federal agents were interested in Whitmore Academy for reasons they wouldn't fully explain. Agent Sarah Martinez hinted at ongoing investigations into private school accreditation fraud, but claimed Jennifer's case was unrelated. Morrison sensed that everyone knew more than they were willing to share. The school faculty remained nervously evasive. The detective realized he was investigating more than just a missing person case. Jennifer Walsh had disappeared into a web of secrets that reached far beyond room 237, and everyone involved was determined to keep those secrets buried. How deep did the conspiracy go? And who else might be at risk? The micro-cassette recorder fell from between the pages like a secret waiting to be born. Marcus Rodriguez stood in his childhood bedroom, spring cleaning in March 2000. 6 years had passed since he graduated from Whitmore Academy, and the cramped space felt smaller than he remembered. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, filled with textbooks and memories he was finally ready to discard. The English literature anthology felt heavier than expected as he prepared to donate his old materials to charity. Pages stuck together from years of neglect, releasing the musty scent of forgotten knowledge. He had loved this particular book during his junior year, when Jennifer Walsh had made Shakespeare come alive in ways his previous teachers never had. The tiny device clattered onto his hardwood floor, no bigger than a matchbox. Marcus stared at it for several moments, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The black plastic casing bore scratches from years of hiding, but the brand name remained visible on its surface. Then the memory returned with startling clarity. He had purchased the recorder during his junior year, hoping to capture evidence of grade manipulation he suspected was happening in his advanced placement classes. The device had been expensive for a teenager, purchased with money saved from his part-time job at the local bookstore. Marcus remembered the paranoia that had driven him to such desperate measures. Classmates who struggled with basic concepts somehow achieved perfect scores on standardized tests. Students who never participated in class discussions received glowing recommendation letters describing leadership qualities they had never displayed. He had hidden the recorder in various locations around campus, hoping to document conversations that would prove his suspicions. But the evidence had remained elusive, and eventually he had forgotten about the device entirely. Now, holding it in his trembling hands, Marcus realized the recorder had been running during Jennifer Walsh's final night at Whitmore Academy. The device had captured whatever had happened in room 237 on October 14th, 1994. His fingers fumbled with the battery compartment as he searched for fresh power sources. The recorder felt fragile, like an artifact from an archaeological dig. 6 years of waiting had brought him to this moment of truth. What secrets had his forgotten device preserved on magnetic tape? The conversation began with Jennifer's familiar voice discussing Romeo and Juliet. Marcus inserted fresh batteries and pressed the play button with reverent care. Static filled his empty bedroom, followed by the distinctive sounds of an active classroom. Chairs scraped against linoleum floors, papers rustled, and teenage voices murmured in the background. Jennifer's teaching style came through clearly on the recording. She was patient and encouraging, exactly as Marcus remembered from his junior year. Her questions about the play's themes prompted thoughtful responses from students who genuinely respected her approach to literature. But 20 minutes into the recording, the discussion shifted to more mundane academic matters. Jennifer seemed confused about discrepancies she had noticed in student transcripts and college application materials. Her voice carried a note of concern that made Marcus lean closer to the tiny speaker. She asked specific questions about grade calculation methods and reporting procedures. The students in the room grew uncomfortable as her inquiries became more pointed. Their responses became evasive when Jennifer pressed for details about how academic records were maintained and transmitted to universities. Marcus recognized some of the voices from his memories of that evening. Thomas Pemberton, the headmaster's nephew, had been present during what was supposed to be a routine tutoring session. His responses to Jennifer's questions sounded rehearsed and defensive. Sarah Kim, the class president, attempted to redirect the conversation back to literature. But Jennifer persisted in her quest for answers about administrative procedures that seemed inconsistent with standard educational practices. The recording captured the growing tension in room 237 as Jennifer's innocent questions revealed her discovery of something far more sinister than simple academic irregularities. Her voice carried the confusion of someone who had stumbled onto evidence of systematic fraud. 15 minutes later, footsteps echoed through the speakers as new people entered the classroom. Marcus heard the distinctive voice of Headmaster Richard Pemberton, followed by Board Chairman William Matthews and Vice Principal Margaret Torres. What had started as a simple tutoring session was about to become something far more dangerous for everyone involved. The adults entered room 237 with voices full of false warmth and manufactured concern. Marcus listened as the school administrators thanked Jennifer for her dedication and praised her innovative teaching methods. Their tone was initially friendly and professional, exactly what one would expect from educational leaders addressing a valued faculty member. But their demeanor shifted subtly when Jennifer mentioned her concerns about grade discrepancies and college recommendation procedures. The friendly chatter died away, replaced by careful, measured responses that sounded increasingly rehearsed. Headmaster Pemberton acknowledged that administrative procedures could sometimes appear confusing to temporary faculty members. He assured Jennifer that all policies were designed to serve the best interests of Whitmore Academy's exceptional students and their families. Board Chairman Matthews took a more direct approach. He reminded Jennifer that the academy served a unique population of high-achieving students from influential families. Sometimes, he explained, standard procedures required modification to accommodate special circumstances. But Jennifer refused to accept vague explanations for what she had discovered. Her voice remained steady as she detailed specific examples of academic irregularities. Grade changes made after final submissions to colleges. Recommendation letters written for students who had never been in the recommended classes. Standardized test scores that didn't match students' demonstrated abilities in classroom settings. The room fell silent as she finished her presentation. Marcus could hear papers being shuffled and chairs being moved, but no one spoke for several long moments. Then Vice Principal Torres attempted to minimize Jennifer's concerns. She suggested that inexperienced substitute teachers sometimes misunderstood complex administrative procedures. The irregularities Jennifer had noticed surely had innocent explanations that could be clarified through proper channels. Jennifer's response revealed the depth of her conviction and the extent of her evidence. She had documented everything, she told them. Copies of altered transcripts, forged recommendation letters, and suspicious test score reports were already secured in a safe location. The temperature in room 237 seemed to drop as the administrators realized they were dealing with someone who posed a genuine threat to their operation. How far would they go to protect their profitable secret? The locked door changed everything in room 237. Marcus heard the distinctive click of the classroom door being secured from the inside. Jennifer's voice became panicked as she realized she was trapped with people who had the power and motivation to silence her permanently. She asked to leave, claiming she needed time to reconsider her hasty conclusions about the academy's practices. Her earlier confidence crumbled as the reality of her situation became clear. These weren't educators committed to academic integrity. They were criminals protecting a lucrative fraud scheme. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The administrators discussed her fate as if she weren't in the room, their voices cold and calculating. They debated whether her disappearance would draw more attention than her continued presence at the academy. Board Chairman Matthews reminded his colleagues about the financial stakes involved in their operation. Wealthy families paid substantial premiums for guaranteed college admissions for their children. The fraud scheme generated millions of dollars annually for the academy and its administrators. Vice Principal Torres suggested that Jennifer could be transferred to another district where her concerns would be dismissed as the complaints of a disgruntled employee. But Headmaster Pemberton argued that any solution short of permanent silence carried unacceptable risks. Jennifer sobbed quietly as she listened to them plan her elimination. She apologized repeatedly for discovering their secret, promising to keep quiet if they would just let her return to her normal life. But her promises meant nothing to people who had built their careers on deception and corruption. They couldn't afford to trust someone who had already demonstrated her commitment to academic honesty and student welfare. The recording captured Jennifer's final words as she begged for mercy that would never come. Her voice faded into silence, followed by muffled sounds of movement and hushed conversations about logistics. Marcus realized he was listening to a murder being planned and executed by some of the most respected educators in the state. The device in his hands contained evidence that could finally bring justice for Jennifer Walsh and expose the corruption that had killed her. But presenting this evidence would mean challenging powerful people who had already proven their willingness to commit murder to protect their secrets. Would anyone believe his story, or would he become the next person to disappear without a trace? The police station felt colder than Marcus remembered. He sat in Detective Morrison's office on March 15, 2000, clutching the micro-cassette recorder like a lifeline. 6 years had passed since Jennifer Walsh's disappearance, but the case file remained open on Morrison's desk. The detective listened to the entire recording without interruption. His weathered face grew grimmer with each passing minute. When Jennifer's voice faded into silence, Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus with new intensity. The young man had changed dramatically since his Whitmore Academy days. Success in college and a promising career in journalism had given him confidence he had never possessed as a shy teenager. But bringing this evidence forward meant risking everything he had built. Morrison asked the obvious question: why had Marcus waited 6 years to come forward with such crucial evidence? The answer revealed the depth of fear that still surrounded Whitmore Academy and its powerful benefactors. Marcus had tried to forget about the recorder and what it might contain. He had graduated, attended Northwestern University, and started his adult life far from the Academy's influence. But Jennifer Walsh's disappearance had haunted him throughout his college years. How many other people knew the truth and remained silent out of fear? The floodgates opened once Marcus Rodriguez went public. Detective Morrison reopened the Jennifer Walsh investigation on March 20th, 2000. Within days, other former Whitmore Academy students began contacting the police with their own suspicious memories and observations. Amanda Foster, now a graduate student at Columbia, provided detailed notes she had kept about grade discrepancies she had witnessed during her senior year. Students who struggled academically somehow achieved perfect scores on standardized tests. Recommendation letters described accomplishments that had never occurred. Sarah Phillips remembered being pressured to keep quiet about irregularities she had noticed in the college application process. A guidance counselor had warned her that asking too many questions could jeopardize her own admission to prestigious universities. The pattern became clear as more witnesses came forward. Whitmore Academy had been operating a sophisticated fraud scheme for years, selling academic credentials to wealthy families willing to pay premium prices for their children's educational advancement. But the scheme required absolute secrecy to function. Any teacher, student, or administrator who discovered the truth faced intimidation, bribery, or worse. Jennifer Walsh had been the first person brave enough to threaten exposure. Morrison assembled a task force to investigate the Academy's practices and re-examine Jennifer's disappearance. Federal agents joined the effort, bringing resources and expertise that had been unavailable during the original investigation. The detective realized they were no longer searching for a missing person. They were building a murder case against some of the most powerful people in the state's educational establishment. But would 6 years of evidence tampering and witness intimidation make prosecution impossible? Whitmore Academy's lawyers moved swiftly to contain the damage. Within hours of Marcus Rodriguez's public statement, the school issued a press release denying all allegations of academic fraud. Headmaster Richard Pemberton characterized the accusations as the vindictive fantasies of a disgruntled former student seeking attention. The Academy's legal team contacted every media outlet covering the story, threatening lawsuits for defamation and libel. They questioned Marcus's credibility and mental stability, suggesting that his so-called evidence was fabricated or manipulated. Board Chairman William Matthews held a press conference surrounded by influential parents and community leaders. He praised the Academy's academic standards and described the investigation as a politically motivated attack on private education. But behind the public relations campaign, more aggressive tactics were being employed. Former students who had spoken to police received anonymous threatening phone calls. Their employers were contacted with questions about their reliability and judgment. Detective Morrison discovered that his own superiors were receiving pressure from city officials to drop the investigation. The Academy's donors included judges, politicians, and business leaders who could make careers disappear as easily as they had made Jennifer Walsh vanish. Marcus Rodriguez found his apartment broken into, though nothing was stolen. His editor at the newspaper where he worked suggested that pursuing the story might not be wise for his career prospects. The message was clear. The same network that had protected Whitmore Academy's secrets for years was still operational and still dangerous. How far would they go to silence the truth this time? The FBI task force brought resources that local police couldn't match. Agent Sarah Martinez had been investigating educational fraud schemes across multiple states for 3 years. The Whitmore Academy case fit a pattern she had observed at other elite private schools, but none of her previous cases had involved a suspected murder. Federal agents began interviewing current and former Academy faculty members under grants of immunity. The promise of protection from prosecution loosened tongues that had remained silent for years. English Department Chair Patricia Williams admitted that she had known about grade manipulation, but had been afraid to report it. The Academy's board had made it clear that whistleblowers would face personal and professional destruction. Mathematics teacher Robert Martinez revealed that he had been ordered to change test scores for specific students. When he had initially refused, his employment contract had been threatened, and his family had received subtle intimidation. The federal investigation uncovered evidence that the academic fraud scheme had generated millions of dollars in illegal revenue. Wealthy parents had paid cash bonuses directly to administrators in exchange for guaranteed college admissions for their children. But the most shocking revelation came from Vice Principal Margaret Torres, who agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. She provided detailed information about what had happened to Jennifer Walsh on October 14, 1994. According to Torres, Jennifer's body had been disposed of in a way that would ensure it was never found. The conspirators had used their connections to cover up the crime and eliminate all physical evidence. The investigation was no longer about a missing person. It was about bringing murderers to justice before they could silence any more witnesses. Would the truth finally emerge after 6 years of deception and cover-ups? The conspiracy began to unravel as fear gave way to self-preservation. More Whitmore Academy faculty members sought immunity deals as the federal investigation intensified. Each new confession revealed additional layers of corruption that reached far beyond simple grade manipulation. School nurse Janet Peterson admitted that she had been ordered to alter health records that might have prevented certain students from participating in college athletics. The Academy's physician had falsified medical examinations to hide conditions that would have disqualified scholarship recipients. Guidance counselor David Park confessed that he had written fraudulent recommendation letters for students he had never met. The letters described fictional achievements and character traits that existed only in the imaginations of paid consultants. The fraud scheme had operated like a well-oiled machine, with each participant playing a specific role in deceiving colleges and universities across the country. Students from wealthy families received false transcripts, inflated test scores, and fabricated extracurricular achievements. But maintaining the conspiracy required constant vigilance and occasional ruthless action. Jennifer Walsh had not been the first person to discover irregularities in the Academy's practices, though she had been the most persistent in demanding answers. Agent Martinez uncovered evidence that 2 other faculty members had resigned under suspicious circumstances after asking uncomfortable questions about academic procedures. Both had relocated to distant states and declined to discuss their experiences at Whitmore Academy. The investigation revealed a pattern of intimidation, bribery, and professional assassination that had protected the fraud scheme for over a decade. Anyone who threatened to expose the truth faced career destruction, or worse. How many other victims had been silenced to protect the Academy's profitable secrets? The handcuffs clicked shut around Richard Pemberton's wrists at 6:17 a.m. on a cold April morning. Federal agents surrounded the headmaster's colonial mansion in the exclusive Riverside Heights neighborhood, their black SUVs blocking every possible escape route. Agent Sarah Martinez led the arrest team through Pemberton's mahogany front door, her badge gleaming in the pale dawn light. Pemberton stood in his silk pajamas and Italian leather slippers, watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. His wife screamed from the marble staircase as agents spread throughout their home, searching for evidence that would seal his fate. Neighbors gathered on their perfectly manicured lawns to witness the downfall of one of their community's most respected figures. The man who had shaped young minds for over 2 decades was now facing charges of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. Martinez read him his rights, while other agents inventoried items seized from his home office. Bank statements revealed suspicious cash deposits totaling over $400,000 during the past 6 years. The money had funded the Pembertons' expensive lifestyle and their children's education at elite universities. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Pemberton had used profits from academic fraud to purchase legitimate credentials for his own family. His wife collapsed onto their imported marble floor as agents carried boxes of evidence toward their vehicles. 23 years of educational leadership had ended in disgrace and criminal charges that would likely result in life imprisonment. The Pemberton children, both attending Ivy League schools on scholarships their father had helped other families purchase illegally, would now face questions about their own academic achievements. Their prestigious degrees would forever carry the stain of their father's crimes. As the agents led Pemberton toward their waiting vehicle, he caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. The distinguished educator who had commanded respect from students, parents, and colleagues was gone. In his place stood a broken old man who had traded his integrity for money and power. Would the other conspirators surrender quietly, or would they fight to protect what remained of their crumbling empire? Board Chairman William Matthews refused to accept defeat without deploying every weapon in his considerable arsenal. His team of expensive criminal defense attorneys filed emergency motions to suppress evidence and dismiss all charges on April 5, 2000. They argued that Marcus Rodriguez's micro-cassette recording was inadmissible because it had been obtained without proper consent from the participants. The lawyers questioned Marcus's motives for coming forward after 6 years of silence. They suggested he was seeking fame and financial compensation from the inevitable wrongful death lawsuit that Jennifer Walsh's family would file against the Academy. But the federal prosecution had grown far beyond a single piece of audio evidence. Agent Martinez had assembled a comprehensive case that included financial records, witness testimony, and documentary proof of the fraud scheme's scope and duration. Matthews convened an emergency meeting of the Academy's remaining board members at their exclusive Woodmont Country Club. The men gathered in a private dining room overlooking the 18th green, their faces grim with the knowledge that their empire was crumbling around them. They discussed damage control strategies and potential exit plans. Board member Robert Harrison wanted to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. Thomas Bradley preferred to fight the charges and hoped their political connections could influence the outcome. The debate grew heated as longtime allies turned against each other. Trust evaporated when survival instincts overwhelmed decades of loyalty and shared criminal enterprise. Each man calculated his personal risk and adjusted his strategy accordingly. Matthews realized he could no longer count on unanimous support from his co-conspirators. The brotherhood that had protected their secrets for years was fracturing under the pressure of federal investigation and media scrutiny. Harrison revealed that he had already retained separate legal counsel and was considering a plea agreement with prosecutors. His defection sent shockwaves through the group, as his intimate knowledge of their financial arrangements could destroy them all. Bradley accused Harrison of cowardice and betrayal, threatening to expose embarrassing personal information if he cooperated with the government. But Harrison countered that their criminal conspiracy was finished regardless of whether they faced justice with dignity or continued fighting a hopeless battle. The meeting ended with harsh words and bitter recriminations. Men who had been friends and business partners for decades parted as enemies, each determined to save himself from the consequences of their collective crimes. How many of Matthews's former allies would abandon him to pursue individual plea agreements with federal prosecutors? Vice Principal Margaret Torres broke first under the relentless pressure of federal interrogation. She sat across from Agent Martinez and Detective Morrison in a sterile conference room at the FBI field office, her hands trembling as she signed the cooperation agreement. The woman who had helped orchestrate Jennifer Walsh's disappearance was now ready to reveal everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. Torres had been the weakest link in the conspiracy from the beginning. Unlike her male colleagues, she had never fully embraced the criminal aspects of their operation. Guilt had eaten away at her for 6 years, manifesting in chronic insomnia and anxiety attacks that required medication. She described the events of October 14, 1994, in horrifying detail. Jennifer had been lured back to room 237 under the pretense of discussing her concerns with school administrators in a collaborative, supportive environment. The meeting had been a carefully planned trap designed to assess the threat she posed to their lucrative operation. When Jennifer refused to be silenced through intimidation or purchased through bribery, the conspirators realized they had no choice but to eliminate her permanently. Board Chairman Matthews had made the final decision, Torres claimed. Pemberton and the others had simply followed orders from the man who controlled their careers and financial futures. Torres revealed that Jennifer's murder had not been spontaneous violence born of panic. The conspirators had spent hours debating their options before concluding that her death was necessary to protect their scheme. They had coldly calculated the risks and benefits of various approaches to silencing her. Jennifer's body had been disposed of using industrial equipment borrowed from Hartley Construction, a company owned by board member Thomas Bradley. The conspirators had access to resources and expertise that made her disappearance appear impossible for law enforcement to solve. Torres provided specific locations where evidence might still be recovered, along with names of additional conspirators who had assisted in covering up the crime. Her confession corroborated every detail captured on Marcus Rodriguez's hidden recording device. But her cooperation came with a steep price. Torres demanded witness protection and relocation assistance in exchange for her testimony. She knew that powerful people would stop at nothing to prevent her from testifying in open court against her former colleagues. Would her detailed confession provide prosecutors with enough evidence to convict Jennifer Walsh's killers and expose the full scope of their academic fraud conspiracy? The courtroom fell silent as Marcus Rodriguez raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. October 15, 2000. Exactly 6 years after Jennifer Walsh had vanished from room 237, her case was finally receiving the justice it deserved. The federal courthouse in downtown Cleveland was packed with reporters, former students, and members of Jennifer's family who had waited years for this moment. Marcus wore his best suit as he approached the witness stand, his footsteps echoing in the hushed chamber. The micro-cassette recorder that had preserved Jennifer's final conversation sat on the evidence table, a small device that would determine the fate of some of the most powerful people in Ohio's educational establishment. Prosecutor Janet Coleman guided Marcus through his testimony with practiced precision. He described finding the recorder while cleaning his childhood bedroom, his initial reluctance to listen to its contents, and his horror upon realizing what the device had captured. The jury leaned forward as Marcus played portions of the recording for the court. Jennifer's voice filled the chamber, clear and determined, as she confronted the administrators about their fraudulent practices. Her courage in the face of overwhelming power moved several jurors to tears. Defense attorney Michael Harrison attacked Marcus's credibility with vicious intensity. He suggested that the young journalist had fabricated the evidence to gain fame and financial compensation from the wrongful death lawsuit pending against the Academy. Harrison questioned Marcus's motives for remaining silent for 6 years after Jennifer's disappearance. He painted him as an opportunistic publicity seeker who had constructed an elaborate hoax to revive his failing career in journalism. But Marcus's testimony remained consistent under cross-examination. He answered every question with quiet dignity, never allowing the defense attorney's aggressive tactics to shake his composure or his commitment to seeking justice for Jennifer Walsh. The recording spoke for itself. No amount of legal maneuvering could explain away Jennifer's voice, pleading for her life, or the administrator's cold discussion of her elimination. The evidence was damning and undeniable. Would the jury believe that respected educators were capable of such calculated evil, or would they succumb to doubts planted by expensive defense attorneys? The foreman's voice carried the weight of absolute judgment as he delivered the jury's decision. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Richard Pemberton guilty. November 8, 2000. The words hit the packed courtroom like hammer blows against stone. Pemberton closed his eyes and gripped the defense table as his world finally collapsed completely. 23 years of educational leadership had led to this moment of ultimate accountability. His wife sobbed in the gallery, while his children stared at their father with expressions of betrayal and shame. Board Chairman William Matthews received his own guilty verdict moments later. The man who had ordered Jennifer Walsh's death would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. His empire of academic fraud had finally crumbled under the weight of justice and public scrutiny. The remaining defendants watched their fates unfold with varying degrees of composure. Thomas Bradley, who had provided the construction equipment used to dispose of Jennifer's body, showed no emotion as his guilty verdict was read. Robert Harrison wept openly as he realized his cooperation with prosecutors had not been enough to save him from conviction. Margaret Torres sat at the prosecution table, having secured a reduced sentence of 15 years in exchange for her detailed testimony against her former colleagues. Her cooperation had been crucial to the government's case, but she would never escape the knowledge that she had helped murder an innocent woman. Jennifer's parents sat in the front row, holding each other as tears of relief and lingering grief streamed down their faces. 6 years of uncertainty and anguish had finally ended with accountability for their daughter's killers. But their emotional victory was tempered by the knowledge that Jennifer's body had never been recovered. The conspirators had taken that secret to prison with them, denying the Walsh family the closure of a proper burial and final goodbye. Detective Morrison watched from the gallery as justice was finally served in the case that had haunted him for 6 years. The investigation was officially closed, but the victory felt hollow without Jennifer Walsh there to witness the downfall of her killers. The verdict sent shockwaves through Ohio's educational establishment. Private school administrators across the state faced increased scrutiny from parents and government regulators who demanded transparency in academic practices and financial management. How many other Jennifer Walshes had been silenced by powerful people who believed themselves above the law and beyond the reach of justice? Judge Patricia Williams delivered sentences that would ensure the conspirators would never harm another innocent person. December 1st, 2000. The federal courthouse was once again packed with spectators as the defendants learned their fates. The judge's voice was stern and unwavering as she addressed each conspirator individually. Richard Pemberton received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Williams noted that his position as an educator made his crimes particularly heinous, as he had betrayed the trust placed in him by students, parents, and society as a whole. William Matthews also received life without parole for his role as the conspiracy's leader and the person who had ultimately ordered Jennifer's murder. The judge described him as a man who had corrupted the noble profession of education for personal gain. Thomas Bradley received 25 years for his role in disposing of Jennifer's body and covering up the crime. His construction company was dissolved and its assets seized to compensate victims of the fraud scheme. Robert Harrison received 15 years despite his limited cooperation with prosecutors. Judge Williams noted that his attempts to minimize his involvement showed a lack of genuine remorse for his participation in Jennifer's murder. Margaret Torres's sentence of 12 years reflected her substantial cooperation with the investigation. The judge acknowledged her assistance, while emphasizing that no amount of cooperation could undo her role in an innocent woman's death. The sentences satisfied Jennifer's family and the prosecutors, who had worked tirelessly to bring the case to trial. Justice had been served, even though Jennifer herself would never benefit from the accountability her killers now faced. The conspiracy's exposure had triggered investigations at 17 other elite private schools across 6 states. Federal agents discovered similar patterns of academic fraud, affecting thousands of students and families who had been deceived by institutions they trusted. Congressional hearings led to new oversight requirements for private schools receiving federal funding. The Department of Education implemented stricter auditing procedures and mandatory reporting systems designed to prevent future fraud schemes. Jennifer Walsh's death had inadvertently triggered the largest educational corruption investigation in American history. Her refusal to remain silent about institutional fraud had ultimately protected countless other students from similar deception. The Whitmore Academy closed permanently in January 2001. The ivy-covered buildings were sold to developers who demolished them to build luxury condominiums. No physical trace remained of the institution where Jennifer had lost her life defending academic integrity. But her legacy would endure in the reforms her case had inspired and the lives her sacrifice had ultimately protected from educational fraud and corruption. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of room 237, casting long shadows across the rows of empty desks. September 15, 2001, exactly 7 years after Jennifer Walsh had walked through these doors for the last time. The Whitmore Academy had been shuttered for 9 months now, its halls echoing with the ghosts of privilege and corruption that had finally been exposed to the world. Detective Morrison stood in the doorway, watching as federal agents finished cataloging the last of the evidence. The desk where Jennifer had discovered the falsified transcripts sat bare now, its drawers pulled out and emptied. He could still picture her sitting there in the security footage, her face changing from confusion to horror as she realized what she had stumbled upon. The investigation had unraveled quickly once Marcus Rodriguez's hidden recording surfaced. 17 board members arrested, 43 students stripped of their fraudulent admissions, Headmaster Richard Pemberton sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder. But Jennifer Walsh's body remained missing. The conspirators had taken that secret to their graves, denying her family the closure of a proper burial. Morrison stepped into the classroom one final time. The silence felt different now, less oppressive and more mournful. The ripple effects of Jennifer's case had transformed American education in ways she never could have imagined. Congress passed the Private School Accountability Act in March 2001, requiring all institutions receiving federal funding to submit to annual audits. The legislation bore Jennifer's name in its official title. The Department of Education established the Walsh Commission for Academic Integrity, a permanent oversight body tasked with investigating fraud allegations at private schools nationwide. Former FBI agent Sarah Martinez served as its first director, bringing the expertise she had gained from the Whitmore Academy case. 17 other elite institutions faced federal investigations after whistleblowers came forward with evidence of similar corruption. The network of academic fraud that Jennifer had stumbled upon reached into the most prestigious schools in America, affecting thousands of students and families. Robert and Linda Walsh channeled their grief into advocacy work that honored their daughter's memory. They established the Jennifer Walsh Foundation for Teacher Protection, providing legal and financial support to educators who reported institutional wrongdoing. The foundation's first major victory came when it successfully defended a public school teacher who had exposed grade manipulation in her district. The case established legal precedent, protecting whistleblowing educators from retaliation by administrators. Marcus Rodriguez used his journalism career to investigate educational corruption across the country. His book about Jennifer's case, titled The Empty Classroom, became required reading in education policy courses at major universities. The royalties funded scholarships for aspiring teachers from low-income backgrounds. Morrison retired from police work in 2003, but Jennifer's case continued to influence his life. He became a consultant for the Walsh Commission, helping other law enforcement agencies recognize the warning signs of academic fraud schemes. The detective often returned to the vacant lot where Whitmore Academy once stood. Luxury condominiums now occupied the site, their residents unaware of the tragedy that had occurred beneath their manicured lawns. Jennifer Walsh had wanted to be a teacher since she was 7 years old, reading to her younger brother every night before bed. She never got the chance to shape young minds the way she had dreamed. But in the end, her disappearance had educated an entire nation about the corruption hiding behind ivy-covered walls. The academy's closure had sent ripples through the entire private school system. New oversight committees were established. Mandatory reporting protocols were implemented. Background checks that actually checked backgrounds became standard practice. Every September, on the anniversary of her disappearance, teachers across America observed the Jennifer Walsh Day of Academic Integrity. The tradition began at a small public school in Ohio and spread nationwide through social media campaigns organized by education advocacy groups. Young teachers learned Jennifer's story during their training programs. They studied the ethical dilemmas she had faced and the courage she had shown in confronting institutional corruption. Her example inspired a new generation of educators to prioritize truth over career advancement. The empty classroom would remain empty in memory only. But Jennifer's legacy lived on in every future teacher who chose to speak up instead of staying silent, in every student who received an honest education instead of purchased credentials, and in every parent who could trust that their child's achievements were earned rather than bought. Room 237 was gone, but the lesson Jennifer Walsh died teaching would endure forever.